Dogs are pretty smart. They learn in a variety of different ways. Let's go over all of them. I want to preface this by saying that I will give multiple examples of how certain behavior often is handled. Keep in mind that these are just examples to illustrate how the type of learning works. This is not advice on how to handle these situations. Got that? Okay, let's get into it. First, and most importantly, associative learning. Associative learning consists of linking multiple events together by one occurring right after the other. It is the most common form of learning and is what we will use most during any kind of training. It is so fundamental to dog behavior that you could reasonably make the argument that some of the future examples I will give for other forms of learning are actually associative. Associative learning can be divided into two main types: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Operant conditioning in itself is a broad topic, so I further divide it into two categories: standard operant conditioning and trial and error learning. Just remember that trial and error learning is not actually an official separate category. First up, classical conditioning, also called Pavlovian conditioning, named after Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. It is a learning process in which a dog comes to associate a neutral stimulus with a stimulus that naturally elicits a response. When the neutral stimulus always precedes the one that elicits a response, over time the neutral stimulus alone can trigger the response, even when the second one does not follow. Pavlov noticed that dogs would salivate not only when food was presented, but also in response to other stimuli associated with food. In his experiment, Pavlov would ring a bell every time before feeding a dog. And over time, the dog would salivate at the sound of a bell, even when no food was present. Another more practical example are dogs with separation anxiety. Dogs with separation anxiety don't always start to panic when you leave the house. Some have already learned that before you leave the house, you always put on your shoes and jacket, you grab your keys, you close the curtains, and so on. When you have this consistent exit routine, your dog may already show anxiety as you grab your shoes before you have even left. When tackling separation anxiety, undoing this classical conditioning is one of the first steps. A more positive example could be that your dog gets excited when you grab the leash, because he has learned that you grab it every time before you go on a walk. The other type of associative learning is operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is less about linking two separate events together, but more about dogs learning that their behavior has a good or bad outcome. There are four different types of operant conditioning: negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and then also negative punishment and positive punishment. Notice that negative and positive are in the scientific sense, not the emotional one. Negative means a stimulant is removed, positive means a stimulant is added. Let's go over a couple of examples for all of them, starting with negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is negative, so something is taken away, but it's reinforcement, so the dog likes that the stimulant has been removed. An example could be dogs that bark at people passing by. Could be a cyclist, mailman, other people walking their dogs, you name it. The dog wants them gone, so he starts barking, after which they leave. The people went away, which the dog likes. He thinks this is because he barked, even though we know the barking had no effect on the people passing by, but to your dog he was successful and he will probably repeat this behavior in the future. A simpler example could be that you push on your dog's back when you want him to sit, and when he sits, that pressure from his back is removed. Another one could be your dog pulling on the leash. So you stop completely, the pressure on his neck is uncomfortable, so eventually he stops pulling to avoid it. I know, if only it was that easy. But it's a clear example. So then positive reinforcement is giving something your dog wants to reward good behavior. Like how we usually reward the dog with treats during training. But it could also be less fun for us, like a dog pushing over the trash can so he can eat what's inside. Important for us to know is that when your dog does this while he is alone, it's best to start putting the trash out of reach, since to your dog this behavior has been rewarded, so it will most likely happen again. Another example related to positive reinforcement involves that same dog that was pulling on the leash. When your dog pulls on the leash and is successful, meaning that it gets closer to something interesting, like a bush, the dog is effectively being rewarded. Many people ask me about leash pulling and they insist that they don't allow their dog to reach a subject of interest, like the bush. However, when observed closely, the dog still managed to get a few feet closer. This partial progress is enough of a reward for the dog to encourage that behavior in the future. So those were the rewards, now over to the punishments. Negative punishment means we are punishing the dog by taking something away. The most common example is ignoring a dog that jumps up. This advice is usually given to owners who ask about their dogs jumping up when they get home. The dog jumps up because he wants attention, and in the past this attention was probably given to him, thus positively reinforcing that behavior, even though this attention that was given to him probably was not meant to be positive. So instead, we will take all attention away and completely ignore him until he stops jumping, then rewarding the dog when he calmly sits down. Negative punishment for jumping up, positive reinforcement for sitting down. Another common example is to abruptly stop playing when your puppy nips at you. You take away the fun as punishment. Here you should keep in mind that you should start playing again 20 to 30 seconds after quitting, since your puppy will probably not link the nipping and the negative punishment from the first time. And finally, your dog growling when you approach him while he's eating. Backing away would be negative reinforcement, making sure that he will growl more. A lot of people here take the food away the moment he growls, so he learns that this is not acceptable behavior. Just to be clear, I wouldn't recommend actually doing this, since getting closer to a growling dog can be dangerous. But that's for another time. It is an example of negative punishment. And finally, the most controversial one, positive punishment. You punish the dog by adding something he does not like. A tame example could be squirting some water in your dog's face when he jumps up. An important thing to note here is that a punishment only works if your dog thinks it's punishment. If your dog thinks the squirting of water means playtime, it's not punishment. Another example, going back to the dog pushing over the trash can, maybe, if you were lucky, he got scared of the loud noise the trash can made when it fell down, so he will probably not do it anymore. And last, when you are playing with your puppy and he bites you, you often hear the advice to scream in pain, startling the puppy. This usually gets followed by quitting playtime for a couple of seconds, combining positive and negative punishment. Okay, those were the basics of operant conditioning. Now over to trial and error. Trial and error is also just operant conditioning, but I like to make the distinction because in all previous examples, one behavior immediately led to a consequence. In trial and error, the dog tries random things until something works, which then gets rewarded. Like when you teach your dog to lie down, something you could do is hold a treat in your hand and holding your hand on the ground. The dog will probably not lie down immediately, but will go over a list of random actions. Sitting down, looking at you, bowing, scratching your hand, standing up again, whining, until hopefully eventually lying down. The moment he lies down, you open your hand to positively reward the lying down. Same thing goes for buying those dog puzzles. Some pieces the dog might have to spin to get the reward out, other pieces he would have to slide over. The dog does not inherently understand this and will try things at random until it figures out what works. Or you are sitting in front of your computer, but your dog wants attention. It may try jumping up, barking, whining, bringing you toys, until it eventually finds something you react to. That thing is what he will do more often in the future. But how does a dog start learning? You can't start with associative learning from the moment the puppy is born, no. A dog starts out with imprinting. Imprinting is every attachment a dog makes during the critical socialization period. Experiences made in this period are generally set for the rest of his life. I like to call it the dog's backpack. What happens here will largely determine how social or fearful your dog is for the rest of its life. The critical socialization period is from week 3 to 12, which is why finding a good breeder that knows what he's doing is so important. A lot of behavioral issues are formed here, even if they don't actually show until much later in life. Puppies that have been held by a lot of different people in a positive way during this time generally won't be afraid of other people, unless traumatized later in life. Puppies that get scared during this phase with a loud bang will likely develop lifelong fears, and they learn by playing with their siblings. They learn not to bite too hard, to read body language, how to behave around dogs, and so on. If you are thinking about getting a dog and visit a breeder, keep these things in mind. Did the breeder introduce the pups to a lot of different sounds, textures, visual stimuli? Are the pups in a homely environment? Not separated from their siblings or mother? Imprinting is extremely important. But remember, it's far from everything. Just because this phase went well doesn't mean you have an emotionally bulletproof dog. It's just a big head start. Next up is not actually a form of learning in itself, but rather impacts how the dog learns best and what behavior it might learn faster or slower than others. Or even what behavior will be impossible or almost impossible to remove. Genetics. Simply put, even the smartest pug will likely learn at a slower pace than the average border collie. It's just simple genetics. Border collies on average are way smarter than pugs. Other examples are breed-specific issues. Beagle owners often complain that they cannot walk their dog normally, since they stop to smell everything. But this is simply the breed. Sniffing is what they were bred to do. You should not try and fix this behavior, since it goes against their genetics. Same thing for your terrier digging in the yard. It's very frustrating, I know. But know what you are getting yourself into when you choose a breed. Terriers are bred as pest control. They are meant to work independently, find rodents or whatever they were bred for and hunt them, alone. Of course obedience training is going to be hard. They are not meant to work together with a hunter or their owner. If your terrier cannot dig, he will be unhappy. Instead, redirect that behavior and teach him where he can dig, instead of banning digging altogether. Fun fact, or actually not so fun fact, despite being a very common breed, Jack Russells are one of the most difficult breeds to train and often have behavioral issues. Do you wonder why? Again, just look at the genetics. Why were Jack Russells originally bred for? Well, they are a terrier, so independent pest control, like I previously just mentioned. But what pests are Jack Russells meant to control? Foxes. I highly doubt there are many Jack Russells out there getting the stimulation they were literally bred for, leading to all sorts of issues. And generally, people that say they have a calm Jack Russell, after closer investigation, they have a depressed Jack Russell. Because they have a dog that is not allowed to do what he was bred for. One last note on genetics is that stress can also be genetic. When getting a pup, always look at the mother dog. If that mother dog is stressed, there's a good chance your pup will also have genetic stress. If you ever contact the behaviorist with an issue, and the issue is genetic or happened during the imprinting phase, and the behaviorist says he will fix this for you, look for another one, because you cannot change these things. You can reduce the behavior, but you cannot eliminate it altogether. Same for traumas that happen during the critical socialization phase. Next up, to counter associative learning, you have non-associative learning, or a dog learning how to react or not react to a stimulant after repeated exposure. This is what people commonly and often mistakenly call socialization. In fact, non-associative learning consists of two parts, habituation and sensitization. Often when people talk about socialization, they are actually talking about habituation instead. So what's the difference? For habituation, the dog needs to learn to ignore, whereas with socialization, the dog needs to learn how to properly interact with. Socialization is not a distinct way a dog learns, but is a mix of genetics, operant conditioning, habituation, classical conditioning and more. If you are a farmer and want your border collie to work for you and herd your sheep, it needs to be socialized to sheep. But if you are the general dog owner, you want to be able to walk past sheep without your dog trying to go after them. You want to habituate your dog to sheep. So habituation means that the dog learns to ignore a stimulant after repeated exposure. This is very closely linked to desensitization, and in my examples I will use both. Habituation is a dog learning in a more natural way, whereas desensitization is a training method we use. Like how you should regularly play sounds of loud bangs and other noises so your dog does not get scared of fireworks when New Year comes around. Or how dogs who grow up in a household with other cats often don't react to cats you pass by during a walk. Similarly, when you move from a quiet neighborhood to a busy one, your dog will likely react to trucks or buses or any loud noise from the outside, until eventually learning that they don't matter and start ignoring them. So then what's sensitization? Sensitization is the opposite of habituation. Instead of learning to ignore a stimulus after repeated exposure, the behavior gets more extreme. Remember that fireworks example I just gave for habituation? Let's say you didn't habituate your dog to loud noises and it gets startled by a thunderstorm. The next time a thunderstorm comes around, your dog might begin to react earlier, panicking and shaking at even distant thunderstorms. Way quieter than the one that originally scared it. This fear might also spread out to other loud noises like fireworks or even a door slamming. Since I can't stress enough how important it is to get your dog from a good location, another example could be dogs in a loud shelter. They are constantly exposed to barking and growling, and instead of learning to ignore this, they could grow more agitated over time and bark, pace, and growl itself more intensely. It doesn't always have to be sound related though. A dog that got startled by a fast approaching bicycle might become increasingly reactive to not only other bicycles, but also joggers or running children, or even you standing up too quickly. Alright, we have touched upon 90% of how dogs learn. The rest are a lot rarer, like social learning, where a dog learns by watching others repeatedly do something. This one obviously is more common if you have multiple dogs, and a lot rarer if you only have one. Social learning can also be split in two parts, an emotional and a physical part. Let's start with the physical. Observational learning. Also frequently called learning by imitation. Your dog sees another dog, or human, repeatedly do something and mimics it. Maybe you have a dog that has learned that it gets attention if it calmly sits when you get home. You get a new dog, and this dog, however, jumps up. You ignore the jumping dog, which is negative punishment, which will reduce that behavior, but it has not yet learned what to do instead. He notices that jumping does not work, and here he sees that the other dog sat down and did get attention. Over time, your jumping dog might sit as well. Observational learning does not necessarily have to be by watching other dogs. It could also occur by watching us humans. Like how my own dog suddenly was able to open doors after seeing me do it hundreds of times. I did not teach her how to open these doors. She figured it out by herself by watching people do it. Observational learning could also be used if your dog is scared of something, like how a lot of dogs are afraid to go through a tunnel, but start realizing it's safe after seeing others run through it. Keep in mind that this might need many repetitions. Not all dogs go from being afraid of the tunnel to rushing through it just because it saw two other dogs run through. On the other side of social learning, we have observational conditioning. Observational conditioning is all about eliciting emotional responses from stimuli, after seeing others react to the same stimuli. If a puppy watches his own mother growl at strangers, chances are that puppy will become anxious towards people as well. Or a puppy that has never encountered a vacuum cleaner before gets introduced to one for the first time and sees another dog run away, chances are that puppy will also become scared of the vacuum cleaner. It doesn't always have to be negative though. Your dog could also get excited by seeing his playmate get excited when a toy is presented. And then the next time you present that toy, your dog might get excited even without his playmate being there. So that was social learning. I think that one was pretty straightforward. So let's get straight into the next. Latent learning. Latent learning is something all dogs have done, but it is so context dependent that it doesn't really apply to dog training. There isn't a lot that we could use, since latent learning usually applies to situational awareness and dogs absorbing information about their environment. Like how dogs can usually find their way back home if they escape. They can find the nearest pond or stream when they are thirsty in the park you frequent, or how they learn the layout of your house and other houses you might have visited. And lastly, we have insight learning. I only include insight learning in order to be as complete as possible. Insight learning is quite similar to critical thinking, which is something dogs are not able to do. Therefore, it should be noted that as for now, insight learning is well documented in some animals like chimps, but the research shows almost no convincing evidence in dogs. But who knows, maybe future research will find that it does exist in a way, which is something I highly doubt, but I would be so glad to be proven wrong. So what is it? As previously mentioned, insight learning is a lot like how we learn through critical thinking. It would require a dog to observe a problem, think it through, really understand the problem, and come up with a solution, without trial and error, and without similar past experiences. Otherwise, this would just be operant conditioning. Some examples could include a dog not being able to reach the treat that's on the counter. He looks around him and realizes he could push a chair to the counter, jump up that and finally reach the treat. Or a dog observing a maze, figuring out the best way through it, and only after understanding and remembering the layout, run through it from the first go. or a dog seeing his favorite toy behind the gate and immediately realize it can start digging to go underneath it, without ever having done this in the past. So there you have it, all the ways your dog can learn. And maybe you learned something too. And if you did, that was observational learning, and you can now mimic or imitate what I said to others. Or even better, just send them this video, that might be easier. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.